Joe Louis, the Brown Bomber, earned approximately $4.6 million in his career, but he only saw approximately $800,000 out of that. Let's break that down from when he won his title over a 10-year span. He held the title for either 11 or 12 years, I'm not quite sure. But over 10 years or so, he earned $4.6 million, received $800,000. His manager was Mike Jacobs. And basically, just to get in the game, Lewis's handlers were prepared to basically give away the business just so Joe could secure fights. That's what it was like for black fighters them days. And they did that. Joe Lewis's debut fight at Madison Square Garden done really good numbers, and he was always a popular fighter. He was always popular, and he always did well as a box office attraction, always. Now, you add the fact that Joe was over generous with his dough to his family and his friends, which he would be, They're all coming from nothing, you know what I mean? And just to see some of them have some comfort and a smile on their face, we can understand that. And he wasn't business savvy enough to make it the little money that he earned work for him. He wasn't business savvy enough to do that. More than likely, his education would have been very limited, as a lot of African Americans back then would have been, When he fought for the title against James J. Braddock, Braddock had no interest in fighting Lewis until, even though Lewis had won about 11 fights on the bounce or something like that, Jacobs, who promoted most of Lewis's world title fights, or practically all of them, he offered Braddock 10% of Joe Lewis's purses for the next 10 years. 10%. So Joe Gould, who was Braddock's manager, done the deal, took the 10%, It worked out to be an extremely great business move from Braddock and Joe Gould's perspective, because Joe held the title for 12 years and defended it how many times? And they got 10% every time the Brown Bomber stepped in the ring. So now you have the facts. Here's the irony. Here's the irony. Braddock, an impoverished dock worker who lived through the depression of that time and had a badly injured right hand, was going through very hard times before he won the title against Max Baer. Very, very hard times, He was a good boxer, good counterpuncher, had a lot of power in his right hand. He floored Joe very briefly before Joe took him out. Braddock was on welfare before he won the title. He was on welfare. Not something he was proud of doing, but he was on welfare. Later on, he was praised by boxing writers and the media in general for the fact that after he won the title and made a name for himself, he paid back all the welfare that he received. He paid it all back to the US government. And as admirable as that is, you know what I mean? It is very admirable, It was Joe Louis who paid off his bill, really, wasn't it? It was Joe Louis. While Joe Louis, aiding the war effort against the Nazis for America, was doing tours, bringing the troops supplies, the war actually cost Joe a whole load of money in terms of him being out the ring. His manager Jacobs said that he owed him $200,000 or something like that. And his wife wanted a big chunk when they divorced. You know what I mean? And it was a mess. And in the end, he ended up owing the US government $1 million plus. He ended up having to turn to wrestling, but due to irregularities with his heart, he retired from wrestling. Jack Dempsey served as an honorary chairman of a fund to assist Joe Louis, which is very honorable of him. But Frank Lucas, a mobster, who you've probably seen the film American Gangster, that was based on his life, he paid off a $50,000 tax lien in disgust of the US government's treatment of Joe Louis, along with a deal being struck with the IRS to limit its collections from Louis he was able to live comfortably towards the end of his life. The irony, though, is that Braddock was able to pay back his welfare debt. He was able to do that with the help of Lewis's purses, while Joe ended up going through financial hell, basically. You know, in the 60s, with the emerging struggle for African Americans, Joe Louis and Jesse Owens and athletes of that ilk from the 40s and the 30s were considered to many African Americans who were becoming more radical in their approach in negotiating America as Uncle Toms, when John Carlos and Tommy Smith raised their fists in the air on the podium in the 1968 Olympics. Smith won the 200-meter final and Carlos came in third place. When they raised their hands on the podium in a gesture for black power, a lot of athletes were becoming radicalized in the 60s. And athletes of color, and white athletes too. None more so than Muhammad Ali, you know. But, you know, let's stick with the athletics at the moment. When John Carlos and Tommy Smith did what they did, it wasn't a spur-of-the-moment gesture. They had this planned from a long time ago. I've seen videos about how the athletes were trying to stage boycotts on certain events and how the movement was just getting into progress at that time. And it was a wonderful thing to see. I can't even lie. Somebody from outside of that circle sent Jesse Owens in to see them athletes. They sent Jesse. And Jesse was telling them, don't you go on the Olympics and do what you're going to do. And don't do this and upset people and everything like that. They sent Jesse in there to do that. And the athletes sent Jesse packing, basically. They said, yeah, we ain't listening to you, man. They sent him packing. You know, Jesse was in Berlin. Was it in the 40s or the 30s? You know, I haven't got the timeline with me now. And it was in the Olympics where he won the 3 medals in front of Hitler, and Hitler walked out of the stadium. And Jesse Owens is an iconic figure and a tremendous athlete. Let's not bury that underneath his social standing, his significant social standing. He's a great athlete. And they sent him packing, and he was looked on as an Uncle Tom. And so was Joe Louis to a degree, you know, because he never said anything against the treatment that blacks were getting and stuff like that, and he just allowed them to mock him and get away with it and a lot of shit like that. And it's funny, Muhammad Ali made the conversion from Cassius Clay to Muhammad Ali in 1964, and I pulled up a video not too long ago where him and Joe was talking, and at the time Joe was in Ali's camp. I think he took up the capacity of was in charge of training. I can't remember now. And Ali was joking with him, saying, Joe, you couldn't have beat me back when you was champion. And they was joking together, and Joe was saying, you'd be on the Bum of the Month tour if I was fighting you back then. And all that was cool, but he was still calling Ali Clay. And that was 2 years after Ali converted to the Nation of Islam and called himself Muhammad Ali from Cassius. And Ali didn't say nothing about it. He was still calling Ali Clay. This was just shortly before Ali beat up Ernie Terrell, who kept calling him Clay and wouldn't refer to him as Muhammad Ali. Floyd Patterson did the same thing, wouldn't call him Ali. And there was a few more prominent boxers and celebrities, black boxers and celebrities, who wouldn't call Ali Ali, calling him Clay. But, you know, in saying that, in hindsight, it's probably a bit harsh for them to be viewed as Uncle Tom's, Jesse and Joe. I mean, they had to compromise so much back then, you know, and like, things take time to change. Sometimes it takes somebody to come along, and it's just destiny when that change occurs. And, you know, and since Marcus Garvey, you know, for Black America, you'd probably have to look to Elijah Muhammad as the next powerful man to really radically shake shit up like that, you know. Hence, Elijah Muhammad, Malcolm X, Muhammad Ali. It wasn't meant to be in the 40s. They were just trying to get their foot in the door. And after Jack Johnson wreaked havoc, basically, when he was champion in the earlier part of the 19th century, you know, with his womanizing of white women, his penchant for fancy clothes and cars, you know, and basically he just wasn't going to take second-class citizenship for nothing. And eventually the government managed to trump up some bullshit charges on him, you know, trafficking women outside the state line or some charges. And they managed to run him out of America. They managed to chase him out of America, and basically he lost his championship in Cuba, and they made it very uncomfortable for him. So after that, you know, it took a little while for black people to say, yo, fight the power. Fight the power. Ali used to walk side by side Malcolm X. Jim Brown, who was a big civil rights activist and NFL great, he was friends with Ali. Good friends. They nearly actually fought in the ring. I mean, I think Jim Brown wanted to fight him in the ring, then he decided against it, you know. Joe Louis actually ended up on coke, apparently. Apparently, it's alleged, you know. Hard to believe, but in other ways, it's not hard to believe the shit he had to go through. His full name is Joe Louis Barrow, born in Lafayette, Alabama, but more famously known for repping Detroit, Michigan. That was his hometown. 6'2", 76-inch reach, 25 consecutive title defenses, 12 consecutive years as world champion. Great combination puncher inside. Short punches, probably unparalleled to any fighter I can think of. His short punches, just incredible how much power he could generate in short. He didn't have to do no big swing. That's why he used to catch you, because he wouldn't be doing no big swings. The shots were never telegraphed. They were just short, you know. Poker-faced expression, wouldn't show you he was hurt. Wouldn't show no emotion in the ring. One of the greatest finishers, period, any division, when he got his man hurt. Absolutely deadly. Didn't have the quickest feet, but he was a phenomenal fighter, you know. Fights that I've seen on VHS, Lee Ramage, I saw him KO Lee Ramage when he was a contender, devastating. Primo Carnera, slumped him over the top rope, give him a beating. Primo Carnera, I think, was the biggest world champion at that time, but this fight was when Joe Louis was a contender coming up. Max Bear KO, I remember the Max Bear KO. He floored Max about 3 or 4 times, and like, he was just devastating, the power he was generating in his shots. I think I remember the Paulino Ascudin fight. I can't remember the fight itself, but I remember seeing that name on the black and white videos. The Max Schmeling loss, in which Max was said to be one of the first fighters to use film to study his opponent. He studied Joe. He studied the fact that after Joe threw that deadly left-hand jab, he would drop his hands. He would drop his left hand instead of bringing his hand back up to guard his head. Max practiced timing the right hand over the top of the left hand when it dropped. It's said that Jack Johnson, who was the anti-Joe Louis in all respects, he's actually the model that Joe Louis and his handlers based on how they were going to negotiate being a boxer, and they literally did the opposite to everything what Jack Johnson did, at least outside of the ring. So Joe wasn't allowed to pose with no white women at all, not at all. He was not allowed to gloat after a victory or celebrate too much. More specifically and especially if you're fighting a white fighter. Just get your hand raised by the ref, do your bows or whatever, your interview, and you get out of there, you know? As I said earlier, Jack Johnson used to talk to his opponents in the ring, how he's going to beat them up, especially when he's talking to the white opponents who he was probably looking upon as the oppressor. He'll talk to them while he was administrating and beating on them, like he did to Tommy Burns, James J. Jeffries, etc., etc. Yeah, basically Joe did everything the opposite of what Jack Johnson did, because Joe was the first black fighter since Jack Johnson, and that must have been probably at least 29 years later, after Jack Johnson won the title from Tommy Burns in 1908. that Lewis was being groomed to be the first black guy to challenge for a heavyweight title against James J. Braddock. And the reason we didn't see a black challenger in that time is they were going to do everything in their power not to let another black guy fight for that title after Jack Johnson. They was going to do everything in their power. So Jack Johnson hears about this contender, Joe Louis. He approaches the camp saying he wants a position in the camp so he can steer Joe Louis to greatness. And he's ejected. He's ejected immediately. They say, no, Jack, we don't want no part of that, basically. Their reasoning was any association with Jack Johnson at all will tarnish and diminish any chance of getting a shot at the title. So Jack Johnson's ejected away from the Lewis camp. Apparently Jack, angered at being ejected like that, probably figuring, well, I paved the way for you. Without me, there couldn't be you. Somehow, he affiliates himself to the Max Schmeling camp. This is the story. Some people say this story ain't true, but apparently he studied some of the tape that Schmeling's camp was privy to and helped him devise the strategy to put the first L on Joe Louis's record in over 20 fights, no losses, majority knockouts was Joe's record at the time. And Schmeling done a job on Joe Louis. Floored him early, right hand over the jab, and he kept hitting Joe with that right hand counter punch all night. Some people say Joe was weak. An apparent illness in the build up to the fight affected his physicality, but so what? You know, he got beaten and he got knocked out. But he came back straight away 2 months later, and fought Jack Sharkey, a former world champion himself, who actually lost his title to Max Schmeling. And the fight between Max Schmeling and Jack Sharkey is the first time that a heavyweight champion has won a fight while he was on the floor. Sharkey hit Max Schmeling with a low blow, and Max won his title by disqualification against Jack Sharkey. Sharkey, however, won the title back from Max Schmeling by a 15-round decision. I remember having extensive highlights on videotape of that, and Sharkey used a very good jab, actually, you know, and he took the title back from Schmeling. But anyway, I digress, you know, back to Joe Louis's record. After the Schmeling loss, he knocks out Jack Sharkey in 3 rounds. It was quite brutal, actually, quite brutal. Someone named Bob Pastor manages to take Joe the whole 10-round distance. Good defense and good chin, bro. And then I didn't see the Bob Pastor fight. I have seen the Jim Braddock fight, though, when he wins the title. 8th round KO. Louis went down in the first round. Louis finished it. It was a 1-2. It was a right cross. That right cross was sick, man. Just sick. I don't know what is about these Midwest fighters and that right cross, man. Tommy Hearns had a serious right cross as well. He took on Tommy Farr from the UK. I remember watching a documentary on Tommy Farr, and they showed extensive highlights of the Tommy Farr and Joe Louis fight. Tommy Farr actually took Joe the whole 15 rounds at Yankee Stadium in the Bronx, and Tommy Farr wasn't no joke. He was a good fighter. He beat the likes of Max Baer. He's from Wales in the UK, which isn't in England. Go get a geographical book or something for me. I mean, it's not in England. It's in a different part of the UK. Tommy Farr took him the distance and gave him a decent fight, but he lost on all scorecards. I don't remember seeing the Nathan Mann fight. I don't remember seeing it. I don't remember seeing the Harry Thomas fight, but I definitely saw the Max Schmeling rematch. Iconic fight, very iconic fight. Schmeling apparently was a reluctant participant in Hitler's quest to develop this fascist regime. But nevertheless, that's what he was on that night in Yankee Stadium. Hitler was using Schmeling as a symbol of strength for the Nazi Party. In America, we're using Joe Louis. I don't know if Joe was reluctant or not. I can't substantiate, but I think Joe was complicit. I don't think Joe had no problem in being a political pawn for America. When in all truth, you know, Joe was segregated from a massive percentage of the amenities in his own country. You know, in fact, before the World War, Joe would have been treated better in Germany than he would have been in America. Jack Johnson used to spend a lot of time in Germany when he was exiled from America on some bullshit before the fascist regime, and they treated him like a god. I guess this is why in the 60s Joe was being called an Uncle Tom and things of that nature, because that's how some of the more radical black thinkers were thinking. So this was way more than a boxing match. And this is why I tell people, you can't compare the heavyweight division to no other division. It just doesn't compare. You know, the other divisions are just an afterthought after the heavyweight division. That's what they are. That's what they are. No disrespect to the great fighters in the other divisions, but the heavyweight division, I mean, they wasn't going to use, I don't know who was about them times for America. They weren't going to use Henry Armstrong as a symbol for American strength, for American manhood in the war effort. A lightweight. No. Joe Louis, the heavyweight champion, is or was universally recognized as the strongest man in the world. And when they say strongest, they just mean metaphorically, because you're not stronger than a powerlifter. You can't lift them out. But, you know, the baddest man on the planet is the heavyweight champion of the world. And that's what that was. So it was more than just boxing. So both men went into battle. Louis hit Schmeling with a body shot, and ringsiders said you heard Schmeling scream out in pain when the shot hit him in the body. I'm not sure if it broke anything or not. They heard Schmeling scream out in pain. And the fight was over, you know. This wasn't going to be a repeat of the first match. The fight was over from there. And Joe hit Max with this right cross, man. Oh, my God. Went down, and he got back up. Brave. And he got knocked down a few more times, and it was over. First round knockout. Brutal. Absolutely brutal. He knocked out a fighter named John Henry Lewis, who was apparently a decent light heavyweight champion. World light heavyweight champion. He KOs him in one. I don't remember seeing that. Few more KOs after that. He knocks out Tony Two-Tongue Galento, who actually hurt Lewis in one of the early rounds and floored him. He floored Lewis with a counterpunch. You know, this guy, he had a big gut. Apparently he used to train on just junk food and beer. Tony Two-Tongue Galento. Weird looking heavyweight. Short, squat, big belly. But he could punch. He actually could punch. But he shouldn't have really been flooring Joe. Joe could be hurt. Especially in the early rounds. If you could get Joe early, you could hurt him and floor him. But he gave Two-Tongue Galento a beating. I remember that his face was a mess, man. Joe just pounded him up and, you know, floored him when he was backed up to the ropes. He was just getting a pounding. Bad beating, man. Bad beating. Bob Pastor, he caught a bad beating from Joe. Arturo Godoy. I like that fight. Arturo Godoy. That went the distance. I didn't see the one that went the distance, but one knockout defense after that. They had a rematch. I like this fight, man. And like, Arturo Godoy was no joke. He was no joke. He was a South American fighter. He was no joke. I remember him pressing Joe hard, man. Hard. I don't know how they had it scored, but he must have been in contention on the scorecards because he was just pressing Joe hard. He wasn't very accurate, but just his physicality and determination and his ability to cut the ring off on Joe. Like, Joe was landing counter shots, but he couldn't get room to throw that crisp jab. But Joe caught up with him, man. There were short combinations inside, and my guy was just leaning onto them. He was just begging for the uppercuts. And Joe had no problem serving him. He served him the uppercuts and destroyed him. And he floored him about, I can't remember how much time. He floored him a few times. But this guy was crazy. He was just really hyped up for the job. Each time he got floored, he was trying to continue before the referee administrated the counts. And when the fight was finished, he went crazy. He wanted to fight on, man. His cornermen tried to pull him back. The police had to come in the ring, I believe, if my memory serves me right. He went absolutely crazy. And Joe kept his gloves up, even when he was in his corner, because he didn't know what this dude was going to do. Good fight, though. Good fight. The Al McCoy, Red Berman fights, I don't remember. The Dorazio fight, I don't remember. This could be the period of what they termed the bum of the month. It wasn't so much they were bums. He cleared the division out, man. You know, there was no one there who could really contest him. Almost a similar dynamic to what Vladimir Klitschko has today. There was just no one there, except Joe does have his signature wins and Vlad doesn't, and that's not his fault. It's just no one there really to press him like that. But in saying that, Vlad does have guys like Wilder and a Stiverne win would help him on that all-time ranking shit. You know, that would help him just go from a good champion into maybe a potentially great one. But let's get back to Joe. Big Buddy Bear. I think he was related to Max Bear. Big heavyweight. I think he floored Joe, but he got battered, man. Like, you know, it was just a flash knockdown, but he got battered. Took a bad beating. The Billy Conn fight. Billy Conn was a very good light heavyweight champion. Very good. Very fast. And, you know, Joe is aging at this stage here. And Conn built up a great little lead. He built up a very good lead, man. Just too quick for Joe. Too quick for Joe. And he hurt Joe a couple of times. But he himself said, the Irish blood inside me made me want to go for the KO when I should have boxed smarter. And Joe caught him with them combinations and destroyed him. Lou Nova, he got butchered in 6. Buddy Bear, in a rematch, got knocked out in 1 round this time. Abe Simon, another big, gargantuan-sized heavyweight, you know. He was tough, though. He was very tough. He took some serious shots. He got butchered in 6. I don't remember seeing the Johnny Davis fight. The Billy Conn rematch was a lot easier this time. Conn, you know, was nowhere near the force in the first fight, and Lewis knocked him out in 6. And that actually earned Billy Conn the Associated Press's annual Flop of the Year award, apparently. The first Jersey Joe Walcott fight, well, what can I say? It's one of the worst boxing decisions ever, you know. That's what it goes down as. Dwyer said so much in a recent video, and I've always been saying it for years. It's one of the worst decisions ever. You know, Lewis went down twice in the fight, and Walcott made Joe look primitive, man. Like, Walcott, man, unorthodox style, and he just had so much style, like, just style in itself. Like, I don't know where he got them moves from. Apparently, he calls himself Jersey. His name is really Albert or Arnold Cream, but he named himself after the Barbados Demon Joe Walcott, a fighter who previously came before him, a welterweight champion. And apparently, the original Barbados Walcott wasn't no joke. But Joe had some nifty footwork. He had a great jab, and he had a lot of power and great physique. And he was a very good fighter. And he made Joe look primitive in that fight, man. And at times, it just looked way too easy. Way too easy. It was a split decision. Bad decision. In the rematch, Joe was beating Joe again. Joe Walcott was beating Joe Lewis. He had Lewis down for a count in the 3rd round. But I remember watching Walcott get too cocky. He started doing them foot shuffles on Joe and the shoulder movement. And Joe, with them short, bloody combinations, just drilled him into the canvas, man. And my man was just crawling on his knees to try and get back up, and the fight was over. Destroyed him. And Lewis retired after that. He retired after that. 25 defenses, 12-year reign. Ezra Charles won the title, the vacant title, from Jersey Joe Walcott on points. Ezra was a very good fighter. Very good fighter. But he wasn't universally recognized as the world champion after he beat Walcott. It wasn't until Joe Lewis came out of retirement and Ezra outpointed him that he got the recognition that was due. You know? I don't recognize much of the names after Ezra Charles. Mostly KOs again. I do recognize Lee Saffold. He knocked out Lee Saffold, who campaigned in America and might well have had American citizenship, but he was from Norwegian stock. And he actually fought Bruce Woodcock for the European title. And the EBU, as I think it was called, or think it is called, and the British boxing, you know, people say the EBU, but it really was the British Boxing Board of Control who was behind the whole thing, you know, because they wanted to get a world champion of their own without doing the hard graft, the British Boxing Board of Control. So when Lewis retired and they saw that Charles wasn't universally recognized as world champion, they thought, okay, there's a loophole here. So they got Bruce Woodcock, who was the British champion, to fight Lee Saffold from Norwegian stock for the European title. But they was billing it as the European version of the World Championship. That's what they was doing. Lee Saffold won, so that blew up in the board's face. He knocked out Bruce Woodcock. But when Joe Louis, the old, past it version of Joe Louis, mind you, knocks out Savold in 6, and they didn't have the title on the line. They didn't have Savold's bogus world title on the line either. But when he got knocked out, they knew they couldn't continue with this farce. And they withdrew Saffold's recognition as the heavyweight champion. It was a total farce. I don't know what the British Boxing Board of Control was thinking of, you know. I don't recognize somebody named Breon, who he decisioned in California. The Jimmy Bivens fight, I've never seen that. I don't know, I wonder if there's any film. He outpointed Jimmy Bivens, who himself was a very good fighter, who campaigned at light heavyweight and heavyweight. He was a very good fighter, very good fighter. He was Black Murderer's Row sort of status. That's where he was. He actually owns a KO victory over Archie Moore, but Archie beat him about 3 or 4 times, so that cancelled that out. But, I mean, he was good. Jimmy Bivens was good. Joe outpointed him. I think Bivens was probably on the slide by that time himself. And then Joe's last bout was against Rocky Marciano, who destroyed him in 8, punched him through the ropes. Rocky was apparently in tears after he destroyed his idol, Joe Louis. He had pictures of Joe on his wall and stuff. So is from what I hear. But I think he saw Joe in his dressing room after that, and he was distraught about beating Louis, about having to knock him out like that. He knocked him down twice and finished him off, knocked him through the ropes. But Joe was like, don't feel sorry for me. I've had my hand raised in victory many a time, which is true. And that was Joe's last professional fight. Joe Louis's trainer, Jack Blackburn, a very good fighter himself back in the day. A lightweight. Well, I suppose he was a lightweight. He actually fought Joe Gans. Joe Gans is a former lightweight champion. This dude is an innovator, noted to be a prime exponent of the usage of the jab, the uppercut as well. Some say he invented them punches. I don't think he's probably the first. I don't know. Who knows? But he was definitely credited with innovating them punches to the level that we see them today. Joe Gans, brilliant fighter. Brilliant fighter. Barry Robinson showed a video where he sectioned off a little clip of Joe Gans, and we see him doing the shoulder roll. Just great fighter, done the shoulder roll and countered back with a shot. Brilliant fighter. And Jack Blackburn, who was Joe Louis's trainer, actually fought Joe Gans in a 15-rounder. It wasn't for the title because Blackburn came in about 10 or 15 pounds over the stipulated weight limit. They were supposed to come in at 140, but he came in at what we would call over light middleweight today. He lost the 15-round decision to Gans. Apparently he was just intent on going the distance, and he managed to do that, but Gans won a clear decision. And it is said that Blackburn tried to model Joe Louis's style on Gans's. I remember Errol talking about this, and apparently Joe didn't quite have the footwork or the subtleties that Joe Gans had, so they modified it a little, and that's why we see Joe with that great jab, because Jack Blackburn made sure Louis had a brilliant jab, and he did. He had a great jab. Louis's jab would significantly rock your head back, it wasn't just a tap. When Louis was an amateur, he was introduced to John Roxborough, a black Detroit area bookmaker. Roxborough and another man named Julian Black made sure Louis signed a long-term contract that dedicated half of Louis's future income to the pair. They were very careful on shaping Louis's media image, very careful. They stayed the course for most of Louis's career, but basically they had to pull in Mike Jacobs, a white Jewish promoter, and he basically called all the shots, When the 10-year contract was up, Louis chose to part ways with Black and made the decision to make his wife, Marva Trotter, his manager, and they enlisted Marshall Miles, a black man from Buffalo. Roxborough remained his co-manager. Lewis always said he felt he owed Roxborough his career. Julian Black, who was out of the picture after the 10-year contract was up, Lewis said of him that he regretted never making amends with Black. I spoke to my brethren Derek, is an elder to me, and like he's one of the dudes who got me into boxing when I left home at a very young age, and got led into some bad shit, but he told me about the Bob Pastor fight. Apparently Bob Pastor was giving Joe fits in there, but I think Joe floored him a couple of times. It's on YouTube. I want to watch it later on today. But apparently Bob was outboxing Joe for long periods of it, but Joe got to him in the end as usual. Joe was one of 8 siblings, born to a sharecropper family in Alabama. His father suffered from mental illness and was put in an asylum when Joe was relatively young, so he didn't really know his dad like that, His mum was a very influential figure in Joe's life. Brave woman. She took the family and they fled from Alabama, and basically they fled from racial persecution. The South was really bad then. If you don't believe me, go and listen to Dick Gregory and some of the elder African Americans, They fled severe racial persecution. And they ended up in Detroit. Joe had no formal education, really. He took jobs like laboring. He delivered ice and stuff like that. Whatever job he could lay his hands on, he did. His mum worked very hard. Eventually, she was able to give Joe a quarter, I think, weekly for violin lessons. But Joe, after being taunted by one of his homeboys who was saying that playing violins is for sissies, you need to find yourself a manly pursuit. And his friend suggested that Joe follows him to the boxing gym, which he did. And he was using that quarter that his mother gave him for violin lessons to rent a locker at the local boxing gym. He hid this away from his mum for a little while, but his mother found out that he wasn't taking the violin lessons, found out that he was boxing. Eventually she succumbed to the idea and said, just make sure you are the best at whatever you do. And apparently he used to hide his boxing gloves inside his violin case from his mother. He won the Golden Gloves in Detroit as an amateur, the AAUs. I believe he fought mainly as a light heavyweight, as an amateur. His record was 50 wins, 4 losses, 43 KOs. So you can see the massive potential from the amateur days, just with the KO percentage alone. And the rest, as they say, is history. The Brown Bomber people, Joe Louis. Peace.